All right, Marisa, we are streaming live on Facebook now. Um, and so I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for joining. Um, and for folks who are watching live on Facebook, um, and spending a Monday evening with us to listen and learn, especially from Native women, it's super important. Um, if you have questions, you can always put them in the chat. You can always comment on Facebook, and I will do my very best to make sure that we're able to answer your questions or address any of the thoughts that you might have um, about what's being presented. Um, and this is the would have been the second installment of our Policy Days of Summer, but so far it's our first. So this summer we are hosting a series um, of webinars that are geared towards policy and the politics of reproductive health and sovereignty, specifically for Native people, and what we're doing to address it. And we want to be able to share information, share with our partners about what we're working on, and share our partners' expertise with our community and let you all know that while things might seem dire, um, and they kind of are, we're working on it. We have an incredible team here at Indigenous Women Rising, and we have incredible supporters and partners all across the country and indeed across the globe who support our work. We support them, and our goal is to make sure that everyone has all of the information that they need to make the best decisions for themselves and their families. And I will go ahead and let Marisa introduce herself, and then we'll introduce the IWR staff.
Yes. Good evening. Nawa tira stapi waha, tata sa Marisa Page, tata kita skiri pari arawita arahita, tati chakaku sigata maya nawa eri tata chistihu. Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. My name is Marisa Page. I am a citizen of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma. I'm also um, Ponca and Comanche, and I wear a lot of hats, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but I'll let the staff introduce themselves and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Marisa. Go ahead, Josh.
Good evening, everyone, and those who are on Facebook. My name is Joshua Riley, and I'm the Policy Research Associate for Indigenous Women Rising. Just a little about me. I am from the Pueblo of Laguna, but I am currently here in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Um, I spent my years down here for education at New Mexico State University, and I am so glad to be a part of this organization and to share this webinar series with you all. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. And I'm Rachel Lorenzo. I'm the co-executive director at Indigenous Women Rising. I am from the Mescalero Apache tribe and also from the Pueblo of Laguna, where I grew up most of my life. And I live here in Albuquerque with my husband and my kids. And I am really excited about this webinar series, and I'm really proud of Josh for pulling all of this together, and just super grateful to Marisa for sharing her knowledge and expertise with us. Um, just a brief overview of the agenda this evening. We'll go through our presentation called The War on Indigenous Women, Forced and Coerced Sterilization. We'll have some questions, and if we have any questions from um, attendees on Zoom or from Facebook, then we'll get to those and then wrap it up. That being said, take it away, Marisa.
Awesome. Okay. Uh, oh, so my pronouns are she, her, that chaba skidiki, and that means skeety woman in Pawnee. And again, my name is Marisa. And happy Pride Month, everybody. And I apologize, I have an Apple mouse that is very sensitive, so I may have to, um, it may go back and forth, and I apologize for that. But happy Pride Month. I'm very honored to have queer and LGBTQIA2S plus relatives. I celebrate you. I honor you. I respect you. And yeah, I hope you guys are having a wonderful month. And so, just a little bit about me. So, I am the owner and CEO of a consulting firm called Skidi Pari LLC. I am also pursuing a PhD in Native American Studies with an emphasis in indigenous critical thought. And a lot of my research is on indigenous matriarchs. Um, and then I've worked with and alongside of Native-led nonprofits and businesses for over 20 years. I have three incredible Indigenous human beings as my children, and I have a wonderful partner. So just some of the objectives for today. We're going to be talking about some sometimes critical stuff and very intense uh, narratives around the sterilization of Indigenous women. So this is a safe space, and I hope you all will ask any questions. And please feel uh, just be we're going to talk about these uncomfortable truths. Sometimes it will challenge your beliefs, make space for unlearning, and hopefully some growth for people who don't know the history behind it. And sorry, and I forgot to read, I like to read my occupied land acknowledgement. So before we get started and I move on, I do want to read this to you all. Okay, I humbly acknowledge I currently occupy the unceded ancestral territories of the Siga Tamaya speaking Pueblos, also Navajo and Apache. I recognize the star people, the water people, the divine beings, the holy people, and the ancestors who guided the early inhabitants through these worlds, shaping the cosmos and establishing principles for life. I acquiesce that these lands have been stewarded by Indigenous people since time immemorial, and their displacement and dispossession through colonization continue to impact those communities today. I recognize not only their past and continuing presence, but also their resilience, and vital contributions to New Mexico's cultural fabric. I recognize I will do my due diligence to support the communities. At this moment, I also acknowledge the atrocities being committed against BIPOC populations across New Mexico and Turtle Island and condemn the ongoing persecution, oppression, and genocides happening worldwide. I embrace those who have come from communities outside of New Mexico as well and welcome them into my heart. As I work to build leadership among people of color, I commit to moving beyond simple acknowledgement towards active solidarity and healing. This involves amplifying BIPOC voices, supporting BIPOC-led initiatives, and examining our roles in perpetuating colonial systems and striving to restore just relationships with the original peoples of this land. I understand that our liberation is interconnected and that healing from historical trauma requires both accountability and ongoing efforts. So thank you. Um, I'll move to my next slide. Um, Audra Simpson is one of my favorite Indigenous scholars, and I like to start out with this one. It is a little bit abrasive, but also to have you think critically about what has happened with colonialism. So she says feminist scholars have argued that Native women's bodies were to the settler eye like land, and as such, in settler mind, the native woman is rendered unreapable or highly rapeable because she was like the land, matter to be extracted from, used, sullied, taken from over and over again, something that is already violated and violatable in a great march to accumulate surplus to so-called production. And I think this goes well with this series because we are treated like we are something to be used, something to be disposed of. And this is what the sterilization and the coerced sterilization of colonizers is about. And so, first, I think we need to talk about the war against women. And here in the United States, there is an active war against women, and we are deemed to be less than, we are othered, and especially when you come from marginalized populations. So when we think about what's at stake and what rights are being taken care of, and I know many of you have seen the memes or the posts that say, think about how women's right changes from state to state, but men's rights don't. That is very disconcerting, and we are dying because of this. So when we think about this war against women, we think of reproductive rights and the rollback of federal abortion rights and what's happening to the women who are going in because they are losing babies. They have ectopic pregnancies that will also that would kill them, and and really it shouldn't matter anyways. We need the right to have an abortion even if these things aren't happening, but think about these reproductive rights. Also, when we think about women too, often think about gender-based and intimate partner violence, um, and what also this does to reproductive rights as well. So it's, when VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, was um, being put up on the plate and into policy, it was very interesting to me how many people wouldn't sign this act. Violence against women is it shouldn't be something to debate to be debated on or debated against. We should have rights, and we should be have the right to feel safe where we are, and we should have the right to make sure that people who do perpetuate violence against us don't do it with impunity. So we're just thinking back to that. Not only that, but workplace and institutional discrimination. It's very interesting to me how many rights we didn't have up until recently. And I mean, within my mother's generation, not that old yet, but I know that we couldn't get credit cards and such until the 70s. We couldn't get mortgages. In many states, we weren't even allowed to divorce our husbands. And so that discrimination still happens all the time. And so, again, this war against women, and this does go back to reproductive rights because when we are not feeling safe and we're not being respected, these go back to our rights. And we also don't want to bring babies into a world where violence can be perpetuated against them. And not only that, but the U.S. wants to tout itself as this really amazing place where it's land of the free. But when we're rolling back these rights, we're also setting an international stage for the perpetuation against taking rights away from women, for allowing violence against women, for allowing discrimination. So when we think about what's actually happening, there is an outright war against women. Um, so this also leads to um, this forced and coerced sterilization of women, that thinking that they have ownership over women's bodies. Um, so just a little history, and again, like I said, this history is very recent. So in the 1960s, there was a lot of forced sterilization and coerced sterilization against Indigenous women. And reading this, it was very disconcerting thinking about what was happening. So they were saying that 25 to 50% of Native women were sterilized during this era. And they were going in for routine surgeries like appendix taken out and coming out with their tubes tied or their tubes gone. It's very amazing to me that that they knew that over 3,000 Native American women were sterilized by IHS between 1973 and 1976. Also, because this is also has a lot to do with eugenics, which is very, very awful as well. When we think about, this white supremacy, is still has been practiced even after we thought it was gone. We know that it's still happening, but this is an act of white supremacy. This taking away of our ability to procreate. And so for me, it's really hard. And in the next couple of slides, I'll read some of the stories, and including my own story of coerced sterilization. Um, and all this actually leads to so much more. It leads to distress, and that means that women aren't getting the medical care that they need. It's producing, this complete assault on reproductive autonomy, and again, this eugenics legacy that uh, aimed at controlling Indigenous families and denial of reproductive health care, essentially. So, yeah. So here are some of the things, the methods of coercion that happened. So women were actually signing consent forms while in active labor or under sedation, or there was different things happening. They go in and come out with being sterilized. There were threats to withhold their benefits and take into custody of existing children unless they agreed to sterilization. Also, this kind of is something that happened with the Indian Child Welfare Act, was that women were scared to go into the hospital because their children were taken away at such high rates that we had to actually enact federal policy for people to stop stealing our children. They were even scared to take their children to the dentist because they would sometimes come out without their children. So again, these forms of white supremacy and coercion to be under the thumb, to agree to the sterilization of themselves. Also, they performed tubal ligations. There's also the salpinectomy, where they take out your entire tubes, and hysterectomies without any consent. Or they would get consent, but also tell them that this was reversible. And people were, you try to trust doctors. So then it's just this horrible cycle. The misrepresentation, sterilization as reversible, also targeting women who already had children under the eugenicist assumption about indigenous fertility. So, so when we think about that, what that means, and And so I'll actually here's where I'll actually tell my story and then some of the stories that I've read about. But and I apologize if I get a little emotional, but I had my last child at 39 and it was in the state of Florida. Uh, the doctor um, was really adamant about taking my tubes, so I did have the salpinectomy, and she told me all these benefits of, this is what's going to happen. You'll probably get, you could get fallopian cancer, uterine cancer. She named all these things off, and that it would be better for me to get my tubes completely removed. And so, of course, I'm in distress. I'm not thinking straight, and I'm like, like, fine, let's do it, because she was saying because of, my weight, my age, this and that I this would be the best um scenario for me. So I so I so I went ahead and I got my fallopian tubes completely removed. Um then I was an older mom, but I started talking with some of my white counterparts who also were the same age as me. One of my white friends had a baby who had hydrocephaly, and I was talking to her about what had happened, and she looked at me and she's like, Marisa, my baby had hydrocephaly. I am older than you. I but I'm white. And she said, my doctor never asked me to get my fallopian tubes removed. She never suggested any of this. And so I started talking with other women, and they were not Indigenous women. I have white sisters. They are my stepsisters. They're still my sisters, but they also were not. They had babies later in life. They were also not asked to get their tubes removed. And so this really had me start thinking about what this meant and what they're still doing still here. And this was in 2019. So we're not looking at the 70s, we're looking at 50 years later that this is still happening. And so this is what made me think and want to do this session, because it is still happening and I want to be a voice and an advocate for people to say, talk more with your doctors. If this is not the right decision, don't do it. Because they did essentially take away my fertility. And so yes, and I know that I'm not the only Indigenous woman that this is happening all the time, and we're not realizing it. And we're saying, oh, they want, this is in our best like health decision, but is it really? Or is it still the agenda of white supremacy to ensure that our fertility is taken away? And I think that's one thing. So before before I start more, I don't know if there are any questions, if everything's okay, like slow down.
Yeah, let's take a deep breath. And just so many thanks to you for sharing your story. Um, because I experienced something very similar with coercion to be on birth control as a young mom and being told by multiple doctors my copper IUD was working as it should and I'm too young to have more children. And that's a decision that should have been left between my husband and me. And you're absolutely right. This is continuing. It took me 6 doctors to get my copper IUD removed because it was making me sick. So, yeah, this is absolutely still happening, unfortunately, and it makes me so angry. But it also makes me hopeful that the more that we tell our stories, the more our young people, our own daughters, our nieces, our young interns who are interning with us at IWR, know that, oh, this is a red flag, that I shouldn't be in distress and making a lifelong decision beyond welcoming a new baby into my life.
Yes, well said. And I think that one thing, if you're feeling pressured, that is the biggest red flag. Like, you know, this is take a week, take a month, think about it because there's gonna still be doctors there. Even get a second opinion. And and yeah, just if it makes you feel uncomfortable, then that's your mind, your body, your heart telling you that step away. Uh,
Yes. I also want to flag that this is not meant for women who want to be sterilized. That I think our movement, especially when it comes to white women, is a lot of times the conversation's like, well, I chose to be sterilized. I chose to have an abortion. I'm happy I had an abortion. I'm happy that I had XYZ. And it's like, okay, that's great. But also, the state is not working against you. They're actually supporting you to have more children. For us, it's about control by the government to tell us when we can and can't have babies, and then punishing us no matter what we choose. And so, just like flagging for folks and even our Native men, who want to be supportive, like, yeah, shouldn't you be able to make these decisions like when you want to? Yes. And it's okay for us to feel grief after an abortion. It's okay for us to take time to make decisions about our abortion. It's also okay for us to take time to decide whether or not sterilization is okay for us. The point is, we make the decision based
yeah.
on our circumstances, not what a medical doctor thinks is appropriate for us based on their assumptions, right? Like you talk about like your weight and your age. There's a lot of fat phobia in the Western medical system about how bodies should look. But people don't know you and I lift. You and I are like badass, strong Native women, and that our bodies genetically are going to be very different. Health looks very different for us than it does for white women. And so a lot of these like notions in the medical system don't apply to us because they were based on eugenics and what the ideal body looks like.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And that and that too, it's not and so all that plus they also have assumptions on your economic status, and they also compare you to white households that just don't fit in with a lot of Native households who are intergenerational. And there are many studies that intergenerational children actually thrive more. When they live in those households, they thrive more. And so it's just all these assumptions being made around these white supremacy ideals that they do better, they know better. And so yeah, there's a lot that goes into this, and we could talk all day about some of the or other reasons why they don't want us to have babies or why they think we shouldn't. And two, I do have to say I did have a baby at 17, but then I also had a baby when I was 35 and 39. So it was there's I can make those decisions for myself, and I can make the decisions that are best for me. And if I would have, I would have done things different. I probably would not. I'm gonna say 99% sure I wouldn't have had my tubes out, completely out. So, and if I did want to have another baby, it would cost a lot of money because they would have to harvest eggs. But also that's my decision as well. So yeah. So some of the stories I wanted to read, because they did finally recognize, a few years ago that this was happening, but nationally, federally. But the patient or the case that started it all was in 1972, and it was a 26-year-old Native American woman that walked into a hospital in California. She was ready to start a family, and she was Choctaw Cherokee. So she went in and said, "Hey, I want to reverse my sterilization." She had been told it was temporary. And her name is Yuri, and she assumed that this was an isolated case. But as she reached out to other Native women, she did hear the story time and time again that sterilizations were performed without women's knowledge or full consent. So this also led her to investigate the IHS facilities in Oklahoma, and doctors had sterilized hundreds of young Native American women. They're saying 1 in 4 women who came in to give birth were sterilized, and they ended up calling it the sterilization factory. Her findings were reported by the Native American newspaper in the Akwesasne Notes in 1974, which also prompted other tribes to begin investigating their own communities. Also in 1972, Jean Whitehorse from the Navajo Nation was admitted to an IHS hospital in Gallup with a ruptured appendix. She was 22 and a new mother. She said she was in extreme pain, and then they provided her with a stack of consent forms before rushing her into emergency surgery. She said the nurse held the pin in my hand. I just signed on the line. Years later, when she struggled to conceive a second child, she returned to the hospital and learned that she had received a tubal ligation. She didn't tell anybody for 40 years. Um, then we also look at some of the forced sterilization, and it wasn't just natives. Where they're finding that in a lot of Black communities, this is also practiced. Uh, and they say that the Ralph v. Weinberger, the case that forced federal reform, was Minnie Lee and Mary Alice Ralph were Black teenage girls in Montgomery, Alabama, who were sterilized without their own consent or their mothers. The Supreme Court found that the HHS regulations on sterilization were arbitrary and unreasonable for failing to guarantee real informed consent. And the case revealed that federal family planning funds were used to sterilize an estimated 100 to 150,000 people per year through coercion. So it is just another form of eugenics, white supremacy. They want to stop Black Indigenous communities from having children, and it's extremely sad that this still continues, but in different ways under the guise of the health, again, the best health of the mothers. So yeah, and I know I'm reading some heavy stuff, but I think it's important to think about still in these 2000s that this is happening. So it just wasn't a 1960s, 1970. And, this is part of the genocidal tactics that have been what the United States government has perpetuated violence against indigenous communities. You know, it's just the first, second, third coming of the same old Calvary. And so I think about, you know, they're still trying to get rid of us. So yeah. And you know, there is a crisis not just in the United States. I mean, even in the Americas, we know that this is going on in different forms all over the world. Um, but just thinking about, you know, uh, that this happening in Canada and that in the 90s it was really happening under the Fujimori administration in Peru. So they keep trying to ensure that women from marginalized communities aren't having babies. Um, and so just thinking about how this all ties into, um, you know, reproductive health, reproductive sovereignty, and what this also means, you know, for Indigenous women is there's continued state control over Indigenous bodies. We're disrupting Indigenous body autonomy. We also know that, you know, this coerced sterilization or even lack of reproductive health leads to maternal mortality. And so, Indigenous women are 2 to 3 times more likely to die as a result of pregnancy um, than white women, according to the CDC. We're looking at violence rates in Indigenous communities, which unfortunately are extremely high. And so the Dobbs decision to, you know, it's a violence in a different form, and that we're not able to access the healthcare that we need and deserve. And also because we also know that this violence, a vast majority of it is at the hands of non-native perpetrators. Um, and why, you know, why is, when I think about this too, I think with coerced sterilization, why isn't this happening to men? And why aren't we making sure that, you know, men who have violated women don't have they how can they still reproduce? And so especially, you know, when it's done too with a lot of with impunity. And thinking about, you know, how again this violence and this leads to restricted abortion access, and that is violence against Native women as well. And thinking about that as these prenatal care gaps, the access to insurance, the transportation, discrimination-free care. Many Native women already face, you know, an inadequate care before abortion access even enters the picture. With all the federal rollbacks when it comes to funding, especially to an IHS, we are seeing these stories where women have to drive hundreds of miles to access reproductive health care. And so just thinking about these healthcare even deserts. So what Dobbs is doing is so much more than just preventing people from accessing abortion access. There, it's really leading to a lot of death. So, and this is important to me too. So, so then as Indigenous women rising, um, I really think this is so important, and this new term that they're coining and this new reproductive health care phrase, which is reproductive sovereignty. And I would like Rachel to talk more about this, but but it's rooted in the self-determination and complete bodily autonomy. It encompasses the right to govern the conditions of life creation, timing, manner, nurturing, and care of bodies, as well as the terms of building life. This implies that decisions related to contraception, pregnancy, childbirth, parenting, adoption, and family formation are more than a personal choices, that these are act of nationhood. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, is that we we need the rights to determine what happens to our body, not the government. This has nothing to do with them. And we this is what we really need to be ensuring, that Indigenous women, that marginalized communities, that reproductive sovereignty is at the core of reproductive health care. So that we are not continuing to be coerced or even forced to be sterilized to also have babies, to that somebody else is determining the rights of our bodies. So I would like Rachel to talk about this too a little bit more. She does it so much more eloquently than I do.
Oh my God, no, stop. This is so beautiful. I want to like take this and incorporate it into what we've already created within the org. So yeah, Marisa hit it spot on. It is all of these are acts of nationhood that our ancestors and our descendants have always thought of and will always think of the generations that we bring into the world and who we have or create families with. Um, I always think of the Mescalero Apache Museum, which is located on the res in Mescalero, New Mexico. There's a picture of an Apache family, and the caption with it says that Apaches love children, but to have a lot of children was not desirable. And if we look at history, Apaches were very nomadic and went all the way through what we now call Canada, all the way through what we call Mexico. And I mean, my ancestors always had to think not just of migration, but famine, war, and drought. And that's what a lot of other tribes were thinking of too. Were they at war? Were they being raided? Was it a good time to have a family or was it not? And that bringing new life into the world wasn't just an individual family, a nuclear family decision. It was, what can the entire village or the community handle? It was a community responsibility to help with the children. It wasn't just the parents that took care of the children, it was clan, kinship, grandparents, aunties, uncles, siblings. And so when creating a family, and please, everyone, keep in mind if you're not familiar with blood quantum is not traditional. That's not a thing. It never was. It was imposed on us, forced on us by the federal government in an attempt to take land. Because if you don't have Indians, then you can take the land. And so a lot of tribes today, a lot of our community members now are facing the very real potential of not having members in the next 20 years or even in the next 10 years because of blood quantum. And so, and one of our board members, Dr. Danielle Lucero from Isleta Pueblo, did her dissertation on these very real questions that we as Native women have to ask ourselves about who we have children with and will they be able to be enrolled? What are the benefits? Because if we're not enrolled or if we're not considered descendants by our tribes, we don't get access to things like Indian health services. The federal government kind of like dangles what they would call entitlement programs above our heads and make it dependent on whether or not we're recognized by the federal government and our tribal nation in order to have access to a lot of these programs that we need to survive. And so reproductive sovereignty is a framework that allows us to think beyond just whether or not to have children, but allows us to think more critically about our community as a whole, our clan systems, our kinship, how we relate to each other, and also our tribal governments and the very sacred responsibility they have to make decisions about the future of their people, even when we don't agree, that they're doing the best that they can with the resources they have, because many times tribal governments do not have the resources that municipalities have, that states have, that the federal government has. Many of the Pueblo governors here in New Mexico are not only governors, they are also tribal historic preservation officers, traditional leaders. They have to be de facto attorneys or finance experts or HR experts and mediators. They hold so many different responsibilities for their people that would otherwise be outsourced, or have staff if they worked in the city government or in the federal government. So, um, reproductive sovereignty allows us to think about how those responsibilities are held, and it's not time bound, because folks who are against abortion, who are for eugenics, make everything feel so urgent. White supremacy is built on urgency, whereas our ancestors, our communities, and even how we operate today, we have to take time. We have to go to our village. We have to go to our elders, our traditional leaders, our clan mothers, or whatever the norm is in our respective tribal communities, in order to make the best decision for us now and the future generations. Whereas again, capitalism requires we need to make a decision immediately in this term, in this election cycle, in this fiscal year, and that's not how our communities work. So again, reproductive sovereignty is a framework that hopefully allows um, for Native communities to be able to address those things holistically and see our reproductive decisions in that framework. And also, reproductive sovereignty is for everybody. It just puts Native folks and our cultural, spiritual beliefs and our ways of governance at the center.
Yes. Yeah, that's so beautiful. I also think too, with reproductive sovereignty is that we go back to, our indigenous roots that were centered around our matriarchs, because we know that they are life givers, they are our child bearers, they and white supremacy is all about disempowering indigenous women, and so like shifting, these paradigms to where we are going back to that respect for indigenous women, indigenous child bearers, and revering them as the beautiful sacred life givers that they are, honoring them. And all this too goes back to celebrating, um like celebrating the life givers, the child bearers. And so instead of wielding power over them, and that's essentially what it is about, is the power that they want to continue to keep constraining indigenous communities. And yes, we, having children is a big responsibility, and it is celebrated. And when and if we do reproduce, always should be our decision, our family's decision. And so I really appreciate what you said about, indigenous communities, because I think it's something to really think about, and how we can, some of the solutions that we can come up with to stop what continues to happen all around the world, all around our United States. So yeah, thinking about this, uh, so some of the solutions is, to get away from this is, thinking about how we can come as a community, and we can, um, Hyde Amendment reform, Medicaid doula reimbursements, IHS appropriation protection, because there's a lot of Indigenous communities who continue to get their health care from IHS. However, in Pawnee in Oklahoma, they really shut those IHS facilities up real quick. So it's unfortunate that this is happening, but also tribal sovereignty-based solutions. And most importantly, community-based and cultural restoration. So going back to our Indigenous values, and and practicing our inherent legal right to sovereignty, right? So just thinking about what we can do as Indigenous communities, with those values, and going back to the way we used to birth, getting away from some of the practices. And we know that when women feel safest, that they're going to make the best decisions. So that includes, right from the start, having those Indigenous midwives and doulas, and ceremonial birthing centers, um, where you have your community surrounding you, those women who have helped birth, and the women you feel safe around. And also going back to the traditional medicine use, so thinking about how we can really shift this paradigm again, and make it safe for women to have and not to have children if that's their desire. So yeah, I just, when we really think about, sterilization, it's not, and coerced sterilization, it's not a thing of the past. It's still happening, and these are important conversations that we need to continue to have. As Rachel said, thinking about our future generations, and making sure they know that this is their decision, this is what's best for them, that they're not being influenced, or that they don't feel pressure to do what the doctor says, because a lot of doctors still play into these white supremacy ideals, and thinking that what we do as Indigenous families has to match their ideal of a nuclear family, their ideal of their capitalistic, you know, um, ways, and how they think we should be living life. So yeah, I think that what the biggest thing that we can do as Indigenous communities, as Black Indigenous communities, is have these conversations, keep talking about it, making sure that we're always also at the table when decisions are being made. I know it's hard right now, um, because they're really doing the best that they can to disempower us, to not have us there to make decisions about our bodies, when you know not a single woman's at the table. So just thinking about more solutions and these important conversations. So yeah, I thank you guys so much for listening to me tonight. I know it's a Monday at 6 p.m., but I really appreciate the space. Thank you so much. IWR, you guys keep doing amazing work. I should have put the donate button for you guys, but you guys need to go to Indigenous Women Rising and donate, because they're a fantastic organization that are fighting for these rights for Indigenous women, and ensuring that we continue to keep these rights. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Marisa. And we have a few questions, but Josh, I think maybe we can do one question.
Okay, yeah, that works.
Okay.
Thank you. Also, thank you, Marisa, for your presentation and the courage for sharing your story as well too. So thank you. So let's see. I guess to end the webinar off, I guess the question that I would ask you is, what does accountability and healing look like for Native communities affected by these practices?
Ooh, yeah. So I think accountability is making sure that, again, we're sitting at these tables, that we're in the decisions where, or we're in the rooms where decisions are being made, and policymakers are also held accountable for those decisions that they're making, either for or against us. Because against us, we're seeing what's happening, like um, with with forced sterilization, coerced sterilization, with access to reproductive care, with access to abortion. We it's it shouldn't be a lot of men deciding what's best for us. It should be us in there, and so that means child bearers, whatever we look like. Also thinking about, you know, um, our trans relatives having babies as well. They also need to be at the table. So we're not discounting anybody, that we're making sure that all voices are heard, and that we're there and we're influencing these decisions. As far as healing goes, I think that having these conversations is so important, because it's not until you don't realize what happens to you until you do talk with somebody. And the woman that I talked to, who was like, Marisa, like, this didn't happen to me, and then it just felt like I kind of wanted to like vomit, that this is what they had done to me. They had forced me, coerced me, I guess, maybe as a but I've kind of felt forced to decide that um I that they took my fertility away. So like, when if you're like, well, they had my best interest, at heart, did they really? Or did they really just take another decision away from me to have more children? And so yeah, I think that's like the healing. The healing starts when we start talking about it, when we make safe spaces to talk about it, when we have spaces to cry, when we have spaces to be. And so yeah, I think that's what I that's what I think is accountability. That's what accountability and healing looks like.
Excellent. Also, for folks who are watching on Facebook, we had a troll. Um, I just want to say there are more than two genders. There will always be more than two genders. There will always be queer people, me being one of them. And long live all the queers, the gays, the trans relatives. Um, I just banned that person. I don't have time for your bullshit. But at any rate, yes. Thank you so much, Marisa, especially for sharing your story. It's I need people to understand that we should not be having to share our stories in
Mhm.
order for people to understand that things are dire. They have been dire. Our people have been raising the alarm for centuries. And it's not if, it's when these policies start impacting white women, wealthy white women, and they already are. So, again, and I'm also asking for more white folks
Yeah.
to share their stories to help us raise the alarm. If you can't donate, be in solidarity with us and uplift our stories, uplift our work. Tell your own stories. Help us do grassroots lobbying with our state legislatures, with our Congress people, our federal delegations all over the country. So, yeah, thank you again, Marisa. Thank you so much for folks on Zoom, for folks on Facebook. It's going to be uploaded to YouTube. I hope everyone has a great rest of your evening. Please drink water, especially if you are on an SSRI or SNRI. The heat will get you. So please drink some water, take care of yourselves. Please give our regards to your families and have a good night.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.